Okay, you have 4 objectives to deal with in the assignment for Module 2 with the readings and the supplemental materials that you have in there. Number 1, I want you to be able to define and explain and understand the term chattel slavery. Excuse me. Johnson outlines this principle in the chapter you were assigned to read in his book this week, and some of the material I've provided in the module on the slave Celia. Take a look at that. It really provides a brutal yet clear description of what it was like for a slave in antebellum America and the trials that they faced being considered property at that time. Number 2, sectionalism is nothing new. I think I talked about that in week 1. But why, after 1846, does the issue of slavery become critical in arguments that were based in sectionalism? Number 3, what were the main arguments that Potter lays out as to what should have been done with land acquired from Mexico? What did antebellum America think should have been done with that land? And of course, this will lead into your journal entry this week as you decide from your character's perspective what would you like to see done with the land acquired from Mexico. And then finally, why was Oregon, ironically, such a key territory or key area when it came to the argument over slavery, even though we know that Oregon clearly never was considered or became a slave state or territory. All right, with that said, I talked about in week 1 that sectionalism is not new. We've always had sectional issues. We continue to have sectional issues. We're a big nation, a lot of people. We can't all agree on everything. And of course, kind of the underlying factor in what we want or need in life and in our government is based on where we live. So we have different ideas, needs, wants here in Indiana than people in Texas or Maine or Alaska. But why did slavery all of a sudden become an argument in sectionalism? Why did the South all of a sudden become concerned that slavery is going to disappear? Why does the North feel like they have to do something about slavery? And what that boils down to is, up until now, it had never really fallen under the umbrella of the federal government. Slavery had always been dealt with at the state level. It had been compromised, or the issue had been avoided before it ever got to the point when the federal government had to take a position, to take a stance on the issue of slavery. We had the 3/5 compromise of the Constitution. We had the Ordinance of 1787, which Southerners didn't make an issue of because they were getting slave states, even though the ordinance that would eventually create the states, Indiana, Ohio, among others, and make them slave-free, there was no real argument made. So we've had these compromises, or the issue's been dealt with before it ever gets to the federal government, before it ever becomes an issue at that level. This all changes as the nation acquires land in the West. So, as we've talked about, obviously the Mexican War at this time, but this was not the first land that the United States ever acquired since its original 13 colonies. We had the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, and that land had to be, or ideas over whether that would be slave or free, had to be dealt with, and that was actually dealt with, excuse me, in the Missouri Compromise of 1820. So again, compromise before it comes to a head in the federal government. So after 1820, they ran kind of smooth. Slavery is not a real hot button issue. Here comes war with Mexico, right? And this reopens that issue. What are we going to do with any land that we acquire from war with Mexico? And we started that last week, talking about what people were saying, what were some ideas. Potter outlines 4 main ideas or four main solutions to what we should do with land acquired from Mexico. Number one, can Congress, do they have the authority? Does Congress have the authority to do anything about it? Can they regulate slavery in the territory? Number two, can't we just extend the Missouri Compromise line? So I mentioned the Missouri Compromise from 1820. If you're not sure exactly what that is, go take a look at it and understand what the Missouri Compromise of 1820 did. Should it be, should the idea of popular sovereignty apply? Should we just allow these new lands, as they become territories and as they become states, should we just allow it to be put to the voter to decide whether or not the land should be free? And finally, you have this group of people that say, hey, Congress has no authority. Congress does not have the power to regulate slavery in these new territories. Obviously, that opens up anybody to go into, say, California, Oregon, New Mexico, any of these places, and Congress can't stop them if they want to bring their slaves. So those are the four questions or the four issues that Potter outlines in his book, and that you need to address and understand from the perspective of your character in journal entry number one. Okay, Oregon. This is odd, you might think. Why are we discussing Oregon? It's never, in my years of study of the Civil War, of antebellum America, Oregon is not the number one state or territory that we talk about when we talk about Civil War. So how does it end up that it's a discussion in antebellum America? Well, Oregon, the Oregon territorial dispute with Great Britain has been resolved, and now we have laid claim to this new land in what will become Oregon. And it's the first territory that's kind of addressed as the Mexican War goes on, to bring Oregon in as a territory. And ultimately what we do with Oregon could lay the groundwork for what we do with land acquired from Mexico. So see, that's why this issue in Oregon is so important. If Congress steps in and prohibits slavery, well, doesn't that give them the authority to prohibit it in land acquired from Mexico? If we use the compromise line from the Missouri Compromise, doesn't that set a precedent that land acquired from Mexico will also apply the Missouri Compromise line? So even though Oregon is really never going to be a slave state, nobody thinks that Southerners are going to bring slaves to Oregon. It becomes the epicenter of the argument, and Southerners are watching very closely to see how Oregon is brought into as a territory. So as you read in Potter, neither side can reach a compromise. We have been so good in America up until this point of putting slavery on the back burner, coming up with a compromise that takes it out of the public eye, that takes it off the political table. We've been able to do that, and I'm not justifying or defending that by any means, but that's what we've done. Now, all of a sudden, as we try to decide what to do with Oregon and this new territory that we may acquire from Mexico, nobody can come up with a solution. And it goes back to those 4 points or those 4 questions that Potter brings up. And people are concerned about this. People recognize that the inability to compromise on this situation is a problem. It's a problem not only for the political parties, the Whigs and the Democrats, because neither party can come to some sort of agreement. And think about it, at the time, the Democrats and the Whigs exist north and south. So you have northern Whigs, southern Whigs, northern Democrats, southern Democrats. But slavery is hardening those sectional lines north to south, which is going to drive those political parties apart. As we move forward, we'll see the result of that. But keep that in the back of your mind that that's going to happen. And people recognize that the parties are in danger, and as a result, the nation is in danger. Because if the parties can't hold together, and find a compromise, and it's the parties across sectional lines that hold the nation together. If the parties split and go opposite directions, north and south, the nation may follow. People are starting to see this. So, Zachary Taylor is elected president in 1848, and this is an interesting situation, right? 1848, he is a Louisiana slave owner, a very wealthy slave owner from Louisiana. And he gets the Whig nomination and subsequently the election, and he gets the nomination based on the support of anti-slavery proponents. Men like Abraham Lincoln supported Zachary Taylor. All right, think about that for a minute. And he's a slave owner. Southern slave owners, they also supported Zachary Taylor. Why? Because he's a Southern slave owner, right? He is a wealthy Louisiana slave owner. Both sides think this is our guy. This is the guy that is going to protect our interests, anti-slavery or pro-slavery. But very quickly, unfortunately for the Southerners, the slave owners, the pro-slavery Southerners, I should say, Taylor kind of throws them a curveball. And they very quickly realize that he is a proponent of slavery where it exists. And he is not going to support, or I shouldn't say that, he's not going to fight over the issue of slavery in the territories. So Southerners have all of a sudden lost their advocate, right? To the point where he says Southern proponents of slavery hope that he will veto the Wilmot Proviso if it's passed. Remember the Wilmot Proviso from week 1, that will outlaw or exclude slavery in all land acquired from Mexico. So pro-slavery forces have been fighting to prevent this in the government, and of course those that wish to exclude it have been fighting to get it through. It never does make it through, but the threat is there that it might. And Taylor disappoints the pro-slavery group when he says if the Wilmot Proviso passes, he won't veto it. It will go into effect. All right, so Taylor is elected president, and he very quickly alarms pro-slavery proponents. Alarms them so much that this really kind of unites Southerners. All right, and in the reading you'll see, John C. Calhoun, always a advocate of Southern unity in the face of opposition from the North. He's not been successful in getting this Southern unity, but this president who wants to not have a fight over slavery, Taylor unwittingly unites the South. Now, I don't want to go too far. Of course, they don't secede. There's no war. There's nothing like that. But there is a lot of political rhetoric, right? A lot of people come together in Virginia, Missouri, southern states, and they call for some sort of Southern unification, some sort of resolution should the Wilmot Proviso pass. So they're kind of circling the wagons, and that's really important to think about. The South is starting to circle the wagons. They're starting to think, this is not going the way we want it to go. We want to make sure that we have a plan. We want to make sure that we have a response. So think about this as we move forward. This is not the first, but it's certainly one of the biggest moments where the South kind of closes ranks. The South says, okay, we're all alone here, and we have to deal with these our northern enemy who wants to limit slavery, right? They want to limit and change what we thrive upon, right? Because I talked about in my announcement this week that slavery undercuts the economy, Southern culture, everything that the South is based on can be traced back to slavery. So they're starting to circle the wagons. I'll wrap it up with that because that's something that I'll come back to, this idea that the South closes ranks and prepares for this envisioned attack from the North. And the Wilmot Proviso, even though it never passes, is this first sort of attack. Even though it doesn't happen, the idea, the perception that it might, is very important. All right, if you have questions as you go through the reading for week 2, let me know. Take a look at the article or the podcast on Celia that I've put in the module. Take those journals seriously. I look forward to reading those. I really want you to use your imagination and be creative on answering some of these questions as you think that a antebellum America would have. All right, guys, have a great week. I'll see you soon.